Your doctor checks your blood pressure. The reading comes back at 138/82. Almost right away, you hear the familiar line, "We need to bring this down to 120/80. You leave the appointment with a new prescription, or maybe a higher dose of something you've already been taking, trusting it's the right call. But here's what often goes unspoken. That 120/80 target wasn't created with your age group in mind. For many adults over 65, pushing blood pressure that low doesn't necessarily protect the heart. It can actually create new risks. Things like dizziness, falls, kidney strain, and even stroke can become more likely. Recent research is challenging decades of conventional thinking, and today we're going to break down what current science really suggests your blood pressure should look like as you get older. I'm Dr. Victor Salinas, and this channel is built on a simple principle. Adults over 60 deserve clear, up-to-date, evidence-based health guidance they can actually use.
That's what we bring you every week, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's next. Now, let's talk about the numbers that truly matter for your age. First, understand this. Many of the blood pressure guidelines still used today were based on studies that mostly involved younger, healthier adults. For years, those same targets were applied across the board, regardless of age or medical complexity. Only recently has the medical community started to fully recognize the limitations of that approach. Here's the straightforward answer. For most adults between 65 and 79 who are otherwise healthy, current evidence supports a systolic blood pressure, the top number, somewhere between 130 and 140, not 120. For those aged 80 and above, many leading guidelines now suggest a range of 140 to 150. Going lower than these ranges doesn't always offer added benefit, and in some cases, it can do more harm than good. To understand why, you need to look at how the body changes with age.
As we get older, arteries naturally become stiffer. That alone can raise the systolic number, even if everything else is functioning properly. The kidneys also become less efficient at regulating fluid balance, which changes how the body reacts to blood pressure medications. And the brain, highly dependent on a steady blood supply, becomes more sensitive to sudden drops in pressure. What might feel like a small dip in a younger person can lead to dizziness, confusion, or even a fall in someone over 70. This ties into a process called cerebral autoregulation, the brain's ability to maintain stable blood flow despite changes in blood pressure. With age, this system becomes less responsive. So when blood pressure is pushed too low, especially with medication, the brain may not adjust quickly enough. And that's not just theory. It's clearly reflected in clinical data. If you're watching this, comment your age and your most recent systolic reading below.
It's important to see what people are actually experiencing in real life. Now, let's talk about one of the most widely discussed studies and why its conclusions need context. In 2015, a major trial called SPRINT made headlines around the world. It showed that lowering systolic blood pressure below 120 reduced the risk of heart attacks, heart failure, and cardiovascular death compared to a target below 140. As a result, many guidelines shifted, and the push toward lower numbers intensified. But here's what didn't make the headlines. The study excluded some of the most vulnerable older adults, those with prior strokes, diabetes, significant frailty, or those living in nursing homes. That's a critical detail. Even within the study, participants who reached below 120 experienced higher rates of kidney injury, fainting, and sudden drops in blood pressure upon standing. The benefits were real, but so were the risks. And those risks tend to be greater in older, more fragile individuals. Take Margaret, for example,
She was 74 when her cardiologist adjusted her medication to target a systolic pressure of 120. She had been stable for years on her previous treatment, but within 6 weeks, she experienced 2 falls while getting out of bed. Each time, her blood pressure dropped sharply when she stood up, a condition known as orthostatic hypotension. On her 3rd fall, she ended up fracturing her wrist. At that point, her new internist decided to scale back her medication and adjusted her target to a systolic reading of 138. After that change, the falls stopped completely, and her cardiovascular health remained stable. Margaret's experience isn't unusual. It reflects a well-documented pattern. A study published in JAMA Internal Medicine found that adults over 70 being treated for high blood pressure had a 40% higher risk of serious falls compared to those with untreated or only mildly elevated levels. And that matters because falls are the leading cause of injury-related death in older adults. In many cases, a fracture caused by dizziness from overmedication can pose a more immediate threat than a blood pressure reading of 142. This brings us to what researchers call the J-curve effect. Imagine the shape of the letter J. On the far left, blood pressure is dangerously high. This is where stroke risk is greatest. As those numbers come down, risk decreases, but only to a point. If blood pressure drops too low, risk begins to rise again on the other side of the curve. That lowest point, the optimal zone, tends to sit higher in older adults than it does in younger individuals. And this pattern has been consistently observed in studies over the past 2 decades. Before we move into practical steps, there's one more important study that reshapes this entire discussion. The HYVET trial focused on adults over 80 with sustained high blood pressure, systolic readings above 160. When treated and brought down to around 150, these patients saw a 30% reduction in stroke risk and nearly a 50% drop in heart failure. Those are powerful outcomes. But notice the target. It wasn't 120 or even 130. It was 150. For very elderly individuals, moderate control consistently proves safer and more effective than aggressive lowering. Take Frank, for example. At 81, his blood pressure had gradually climbed to 168/94 within a year. His daughter was eager to see it brought down further. His physician started a low-dose AC inhibitor and recommended cutting back on sodium while increasing daily walking. 8 months later, Frank's readings stabilized around 146/84. His daughter pushed for even lower numbers, but his doctor held his ground. He explained that a reading of 146 in an 81-year-old is very different from the same number in someone 30 years younger. Over the next 4 years, Frank experienced no cardiovascular events. The goal wasn't perfection. It was protection aligned with his body's needs. Have you ever had a doctor aim straight for 120 without considering your age, medical history, or current medications? Comment yes or no. I'm curious how often this happens. So what should your personal target be? It really comes down to 3 key factors: your age, your overall health, and whether you have conditions like diabetes, chronic kidney disease, or a history of heart disease. For adults aged 65 to 79 who are otherwise healthy, current guidelines suggest a systolic target below 130. For those in the same age group who are frail, prone to falls, or taking multiple medications, many geriatric specialists recommend a more cautious range of 140 to 145. For adults 80 and older, the strongest evidence supports a target between 140 and 150. Now here's what you can start doing right away. Begin monitoring your blood pressure at home.
Take 2 readings each day, one in the morning before taking any medication, and one in the evening. Sit quietly for at least 5 minutes before measuring. Use a validated upper arm cuff, as wrist monitors tend to be less reliable, especially for older adults. Record every reading with the date and time, and continue this for 2 weeks before discussing any changes with your doctor. If you're already on medication, add one more step. Measure your blood pressure in 2 positions. First, sit and take a reading after 5 minutes of rest. Then stand up and take another reading after 1 minute. If your systolic pressure drops by more than 20 points, or your diastolic drops by more than 10, make sure to tell your doctor. This could indicate orthostatic hypotension, meaning your current treatment may be lowering your pressure too much when you stand. When you meet with your doctor, bring your log and ask a clear, direct question.
Based on my age, health history, and current medications, what should my personal blood pressure target be? Not the general guideline, your individualized range. If those factors aren't being considered, the advice may be outdated. On the lifestyle side, one of the most effective changes you can make is reducing sodium intake. Aim for less than 1,500 milligrams per day. A 2021 meta-analysis in the British Medical Journal found that lowering sodium in adults over 65 reduced systolic blood pressure by 5 to 8 points on average, an effect comparable to adding another medication in many cases. Foods like canned soups, processed deli meats, and restaurant meals are some of the biggest sources of sodium in a typical senior diet. Simply cutting back on these and swapping table salt for herbs and natural flavorings like rosemary, garlic powder, or a squeeze of lemon can lead to noticeable improvements within just a few weeks. If you're taking medications such as blood thinners, diuretics, treatments for heart failure, or managing conditions like kidney disease or diabetes, your ideal blood pressure range may be different from the general recommendations discussed here. That's why it's essential to consult your doctor before making any changes. Also, pay close attention to symptoms like dizziness, lightheadedness, confusion, or any recent falls. These are not always just signs of aging. They can indicate that your blood pressure is being lowered too much. If you notice any of these, bring them up with your doctor right away. Never stop a prescribed medication on your own, but don't hesitate to ask for a thorough review if something doesn't feel right. Here's the key takeaway. Blood pressure management isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. The widely accepted 120/80 target was based largely on younger populations. For adults over 65, the most reliable evidence now supports personalized targets, ones that balance heart protection with the very real risks of over-treatment. Your numbers aren't meant to match someone else's. They should reflect your age, your health, and your unique medical history. Now I'd like to hear from you. Comment "checking" if you're planning to start monitoring your blood pressure at home this week. Comment "review" if you suspect your current medication might be lowering your numbers too much. Or comment "sharing" if there's someone over 70 in your life who needs to hear this today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do. Next week, we'll talk about a critical mineral many seniors are deficient in, one that helps relax blood vessels, and the specific form your body can actually absorb. I'm Dr. Victor Salinas. Take care of your heart, and I'll see you next week.